appreciate that you chose to be here. A minor item of business, and that is cell phones. So if everybody would just take a quick look and make sure we don't have any cell phones in the middle of this. And I wasn't planning to do this, but I'm told I should. And my kids will probably be very upset, but I'd like to introduce my daughter, Laura. And her husband, Steve, sitting next to her. And my son, Charles. And Melanie, his wife, will be here. She is a teacher, and she is going to scramble over here as soon as she can get here. So we'll introduce her later. And then on the end, sitting next to Charles, is my sister, Norma, who is a permanent resident here at Valle Verde, living in our village. A lot of you have met her already. Anyway, the documentary I'm going to show you today is called A Bittersweet Return to the Warm Heart of Africa. And it is based on a trip that my husband and I made back in the year 2000. The trip was to Malawi, which is in Central Africa, and it's where I had been a Peace Corps teacher from 1962 to 1964. It is actually the last of 4 documentaries that I've made during what I call my documentary hobby years. But I'm going to give you a little more information about that in a minute. Today's film is about both my Peace Corps experience and about that return trip 36 years after I left the Peace Corps. And the goal of that trip was to search for former students and to get reacquainted with Malawi, which was a country I'd come to love. But before I start the film, I want to share with you a little bit about the very first documentary I made, and it was also about Malawi. That project was particularly important to me because it was the catalyst that got me going in terms of making documentaries in the first place. The very first attempt was actually a slideshow presentation that I made in 1964, just before I ended my Peace Corps assignment. But in many ways it was more than just a slideshow, because though it was made with still photographs, video cameras were not around in those days, at least for handyman kinds of cameras, but it also had a scripted story and music, and it was edited so that the elements of the photo matched with the script, and that makes it more like a documentary. Anyway, I made that little documentary to meet the third goal of the Peace Corps, which is to help promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of Americans. I knew I wanted to do something to address that Peace Corps goal, and I finally decided I wanted to focus my efforts on sharing with American children what life was like for the children I had gotten to know in Malawi. I wanted to open their eyes to the privileges they had compared to the children in Africa and many other places in the world. So working with the students who are in my English classes, I turned the weekly writing assignments into assignments that would help me construct a story about a little 8-year-old girl who was just starting school. For example, I think the first week the story I asked them to write was to remember their first day at school and put it into writing. And then the next week, I think what I did was ask them to write about the chores they had, and if there were any chores that they really hated. And then the third one I think I used was to write about toys. But there were many more as well, but those were just some samples. And from those writing assignments, the narrative for my first documentary, which was called Malia from Malawi. So it was those stories that gave shape to that program. The documentary was essentially based on the lives of my students. And my students really got excited about this project I was working on, and it quickly became a collaborative effort, as they also helped me find a family that would be the actors in the documentary. And then they served as my interpreters as I was in the field working with that village family that they had they had gotten to perform for this documentary. It was lots of fun working together to create that little documentary, and it was that project that eventually gave birth to my new hobby of documentary filmmaking. However, that didn't happen until 30 years later, after I retired. Anyway, once I was back in America, I shared the story of Malia from Malawi in many, many, many elementary school classrooms, and I loved the wonderful eye-opening discussions I was able to have with the children. In the years between my Peace Corps experience and Malawi, let me start that again. In the years between my Peace Corps experience in Malawi and my retirement, I completed a master's degree, fell in love with and married an aerospace engineer, had 2 children, and then a career in county government. But as retirement approached, I was longing for another Peace Corps type of experience. So I started working to get credentialed as a teacher of English as a second language. And after retirement, I was offered an amazing teaching job in English as a second language at Shandong University in China. All the first-year PhD students in the university would be my students, and English would be the only class they would take during their first semester. So in addition to classroom time with these students, many English-only bike trips and other outdoor activities were possible, as well as many dinners in their homes. So my husband and I enjoyed a rich cultural experience, and it was an absolutely wonderful year for us. Needless to say, our video camera captured some priceless footage, so of course, a documentary had to be made. Then a few years later, my husband and I spent 2.5 months in Nepal doing 2 major treks, and one of those adventures was turned into my 3rd documentary. And many of you in this room, I'm sure, saw that because I shared that documentary with you 2 years ago. So what you get today is the last of the documentaries that I have made. Because after creating 3 self-documentaries, I decided it was time to get some formal training in how to make a documentary. And therefore, I think this one is the best that I have done. Anyway, that prompted me to take classes in documentary filmmaking and advanced video editing at our wonderful Santa Barbara City College. And that I did before I started working on this documentary, so it had the advantage of getting some real training. Anyway, I hope you will enjoy it. But before I actually turn it on, I wanted to tell you, before I started it, I wanted to tell you that you will not only see me in this documentary, but you will see another Valle Verde person, and I want to tell you that story. Shortly after I finished my Peace Corps assignment, a new Peace Corps group of teachers came to Malawi, and our very own Harriet Henderson was the teacher that replaced me at the school that I had been teaching at. And she also lived in the same house that I had lived in, and she taught many of the same courses that I had taught. But Harriet and I didn't meet each other for another 28 years. We didn't overlap. So we both were at a conference, a Peace Corps conference down in San Diego, and that's where we met. And then 6 years later, Harriet signed up for a trip back to Malawi that was sponsored by Friends of Malawi. And my husband and I had also signed up for that same trip. So we ended up traveling together part of the time. But the story ends 20 years later. I didn't see Harriet again until Santa Barbara and Valle Verde. So, yeah. Okay, that's it in terms of my my comments. So now we'll deal with technology. See if I can get this going. And fortunately, both Tracy and Miguel are here. So if I get in trouble, I have backup.
I have today signed an executive order providing for the establishment of a Peace Corps on a temporary pilot basis. I'm also sending to Congress a message proposing authorization of a permanent Peace Corps. This Corps will be a pool of trained men and women sent overseas by the United States government or through private institutions and organizations to help foreign countries meet their urgent needs for skilled manpower. It is our hope to have between 500 to 1,000 people in the field by the end of this year.
I never thought of myself as being part of a flock of recruits, but I definitely was one of the young liberals of the early 1960s who was enamored by President Kennedy's vision of a Peace Corps. I was a junior in college when he announced the Peace Corps, but I knew immediately that it was something that I wanted to participate in. A year later, after I'd graduated, I was invited to train for a teaching program in Nyasaland, Central Africa. I'd never heard of Nyasaland before, but after training, I took off with 42 others to this small British protectorate in sub-Saharan or Central Africa. We were the first Peace Corps group to be stationed in Nyasaland. Once we were in Nyasaland, we dispersed to secondary schools and teacher training colleges throughout the country that had requested Peace Corps assistance. At this point in time, most of the secondary and teacher training schools in Nyasaland were run by missionary groups, and my assignment was to teach math and English at a teacher training college, which was run by the Catholic Church. I was stationed with 4 other Peace Corps women in the southern part of the country at the foot of beautiful Mount Malanje. It really was a choice location. The sisters were so excited to get some teaching help that they built us a nice brick house. And our life on this school campus was a rich one with lots of interaction with our students. The need for teachers in Nyasaland in the early 1960s was so great that we all felt we were making an enormous contribution to the country's future. It truly was gratifying work. Living in Nyasaland in the early 1960s was also exciting because it was during this time that the country was throwing off the shackles of colonialism and moving toward independence. When I started my work in Nyasaland, it was a British protectorate. But 6 months before I completed my stint there, Nyasaland became the independent country of Malawi. The first president, a man by the name of Kamuzu Banda, was educated in the United States. He was a medical doctor, educated in the United States. And because he was one of the most highly trained African leaders of his day, there was great hope for the future of this small country. When I left, I was just sure that independence and the future of Malawi was golden. Now, after 36 years, I had a chance to return to Malawi, to the warm heart of Africa, as it is known, that Central African country that had found a special place in my heart. My return to Malawi happened in the year 2000, when the nonprofit organization Friends of Malawi sponsored a group trip. 27 of us, most of whom were former Peace Corps volunteers, traveled to Malawi together. After our arrival, the group spent 3 days together, and then we all split up to pursue personal interests and find old friends. I spent the next 4 weeks traveling with my husband David and with one of my former Peace Corps housemates, Linda Millette. Joy greeted us within hours of our arrival. A long-lost student had learned that Linda and I were coming back to Malawi for a visit, and she had made a 5-hour bus ride to our hotel to welcome us back. It was a total surprise and a joyous reunion. My first impression of Malawi was that time had stood still since my departure 36 years earlier. And indeed, in many ways Malawi hadn't changed. The villages looked pretty much the same, and the roads were still challenging. And the people along the roads beamed that warm heart of Africa smile that Malawi is known for. But the country had changed in many ways, and not all of them were positive. In the first 3 days of our stay, my emotions would be stretched to their limits as I experienced the great joy of being back in Malawi, but also the despair of confronting firsthand some of the enormous problems that the country faces. On our second day in Malawi, a group of us drove out to the countryside to visit a village that was participating in a very successful agricultural cooperative program. The program had been started by a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1980s, and after Peace Corps, that same volunteer returned to Malawi for another 10 years to continue building the program. Today, the Village Enterprise Zone program, as it is called, has become a model for improving the condition of rural farmers. We took great pride in seeing the remarkable work of that former volunteer.
Mr. Chagoma is one of our board members here. We have a board.
But despite the fine VESA program, which in the village we visited had taught crop rotation and developed a granary where corn could be stored for the lean months, we were disheartened to learn that much of rural Malawi still suffers a 3-month hunger season each year. That fact was very disturbing to me. I just didn't want to believe that in the year 2000, people, my Malawi friends, still face starvation routinely each year.
We are sure in any way that your visit is a profitable visit.
After seeing the work of VESA, our hosts and the village headman formally welcomed us and thanked Friends of Malawi for the grant money it had provided the program. And Linda, on behalf of FOM, thanked the community for its reception of us.
Today we are in Malawi. And this was our first welcome.
George Humbert, who had been a volunteer in the 1960s, began to translate for Linda, but choked with tears of joy. George hadn't used his Chinyanja in over 30 years, but the words came rushing back. Following the formalities, the village dancers performed for us. The Guli Wankulu dancers performed, and then, when the village women began to sway to the beat of the drums, I was transported back 36 years, to those nights when the moon was full and the drums would begin playing in the distance, and we would follow their sound, eventually discovering a village dance and being invited to join in. This performance couldn't match the joy of dancing under the full moon, but it did bring back happy memories. After 3 days in country, our luggage finally arrived, all 52 bags of it, and what a joyous occasion that was. The bags had been mistakenly left on the plane upon our arrival and returned to the neighboring country of Zimbabwe. Getting the bags back, however, was not an easy feat due to the limited number of flights into Malawi and the risk of hijacking associated with shipment by truck. This luggage debacle was a good test, though, as to whether or not we still had that essential Peace Corps quality of flexibility. And I'm happy to report that we did. Now that we had clean clothes, we were ready to begin exploring Malawi. Luckily, we were able to rent a 4-wheel drive vehicle, which would enable us to go virtually anywhere. Our plan was to make 2 big loops, one to the south and a second in the northern area. Needless to say, we were excited to get on the road. Our first destination was Lake Malawi, and the beautiful beaches we had enjoyed as Peace Corps teachers.
So, you're Peter,
I'm
and
Peter.
I'm Barbara.
Oh,
And
Barbara.
Peter,
Oh, I see.
36 years ago, I used to come up here
Okay.
and go swimming many times. This is one of my favorite places in the world.
Okay,
And so now I've come back to try and discover.
Exactly.
So tell me, it's now called,
It's now called Golden Sands.
okay.
It is under with the Malawi government, under Lake Malawi National Park.
Oh, okay, so it's under the Malawi government. So
Yes,
it's part of the
under-
national park.
Exactly.
Okay.
We had many happy memories of the lakeshore, where vacation days had been spent soaking up the sun and snorkeling in the rocky areas alive with colorful fish. But things had changed, in both sad and happy ways. Our favorite beach location was now very run down, and one could no longer swim there due to the infestation of snails that carried the Bilharzia virus. That made me sad. But I was heartened by the fact that this area had been designated as a national park, and that a strong education program about the lake resources had been developed for school children. And because Malawi has had very limited industrial development, Lake Malawi remains a beautiful and unpolluted water resource. Our next stop was the Malawi Children's Village, an AIDS orphan project begun by former Peace Corps volunteers together with a dedicated Malawi health worker. AIDS was unheard of when we were volunteers in Malawi, but today it is a horrendous problem. With an estimated 15% of its adult population being HIV positive, Malawi has one of the most serious AIDS problems in the world. Sadly, there are now nearly 500,000 AIDS orphans in the country, a number which is projected to increase by 70,000 each year. Oh, how disheartening that was. Thankfully, though, Malawi is beginning to address the problems of AIDS openly through education programs and media outreach. The Malawi Children's Village itself is located on the shores of Lake Malawi and consists of a small campus with an office, health clinic, small nursery, grain storage building, and a guest house. The project is an outreach program supporting over 3,000 orphans in 35 villages. The heart and soul of the Malawi Children's Village project is the commitment of volunteers. 2 volunteers from each village assist the small MCV staff of 6 by identifying the needs of the orphans in their village and coordinating the delivery of services to them. The goal of the project is to keep the orphan children in their own village, living with extended family or friends. Although high-risk babies may live at the nursery on campus on a temporary basis, the children will eventually return to their village to live with a friend or a relative, with support from MCV for health needs and with food and education. These volunteers periodically gather under the mango tree on the MCV campus for training sessions, such as they did while we were there. In addition to the village volunteers, the program is also dependent on people like us. Many former Peace Corps volunteers have returned to Malawi to work at MCV. Some have come for months at a time, and others, like those in our group, have contributed in smaller ways, such as bringing needed supplies. Most of us had an extra suitcase filled with health and school supplies and children's clothing. During our stay at Malawi Children's Village, we each found a way to contribute in some way. Many of us sorted the donated items in the storeroom, ready for disbursement to needy orphans. And several of us spruced up the reception center. Jane painted a new sign for MCV, and I videotaped and ultimately made a short film about the program to encourage others to contribute. Dave and Richard put their engineering and landscape design skills to work by solving an irrigation problem for one of the villages. We all felt grateful that we could contribute in some small way to the wonderful work of Malawi Children's Village, to a program that has become a model for providing care to the overwhelming number of AIDS orphans. Reluctantly, we bid farewell to the wonderful people we had met at MCV and headed south to visit one of Malawi's 5 national parks. The parks were all new since I'd lived in Malawi, and I was happy to see that the country was beginning to be proactive about wildlife conservation. We spent 2 lovely days at Mvu Lodge in Lwande National Park, with the highlights being the boat ride on the Shiri River, surrounded by crocodiles and hippopotamuses, and the abundance of bird life. I hadn't realized back in my volunteer days that Malawi is a birding hotspot, with nearly 650 species of birds. But now I was a birder, and I thoroughly enjoyed discovering the many wonderful birds of the region.
We just passed 3 coffee shops.
Throughout our time in Malawi, we visited projects that had received funding from Friends of Malawi. And in a few instances, we had the privilege of delivering checks from FOM and other organizations for various projects begun by Peace Corps volunteers. Our next stop was for this purpose. At the Piramiti Primary School, we delivered a check from FOM for the conversion of a schoolroom into a library.
Mr. Chikusi, the Friends of Malawi, would like to present this check to you to help with the renovation of this room to become a library.
They were delighted that the library would eventually come out of the closet. Next we headed south toward Blantyre, which is Malawi's major commercial city, and the city we knew best, because it was the location of the Peace Corps office in the old days, and also the place where we had come to buy provisions. It was like a puzzle, though, to try and figure out where some of the old landmarks were.
Okay, we're standing on a corner in Blantyre, trying to get some handle on what's what. And we're not sure, but this has kind of a familiar look to it. And we're wondering if that might not have been the Peace Corps office about 36 years ago. Candodo Superstore is underneath it now. Was it then? Memories fade.
We wasted no time in taking a side trip to Malanje to see if we could find our old school. We were delighted that a modern new road, the best we saw in Malawi throughout our travels, now connected Malanje with Blantyre. And Mount Malanje was as beautiful as ever. We found the entrance to our school without difficulty, but once we were on campus, we had trouble getting oriented.
We used to teach here in 1963, 4, 5. That's nice. Yeah, and so we've come to see it. We're very confused because there's so many new things.
School was not in session when we visited Providence, but the teaching staff received us warmly and showed us around the school grounds. No longer was our school a teacher training college. It was now being used as a boarding elementary school. And sadly, we found that it, like the other educational facilities we visited, was very deteriorated. Over and over again, the Malawi people we talked with told us that the education system of Malawi had gotten worse and worse.
The standard of education has gone down in general. That's the whole country. That's for them.
A new policy of free elementary education had resulted in an overtaxing of the educational resources. Class sizes were now enormous, often with over 100 students in a class. There were insufficient classrooms, so that classes were forced to meet outside. Textbooks were old or unavailable, with maybe only a dozen books for a class of over 100 children. And teachers often weren't paid until months in arrears, or maybe not at all. We heard many stories about the educational problems, all of which were very disheartening, because we had had such hope for the educational system that Malawi was building when we left. Lucy had told us that several of our other student friends lived in the Blantyre area, so we set out to find them. Without telephones or addresses, we had to pursue clues with stops here and there to ask if people knew Leonie or Susanna or Cecilia. We found Leonie's village and home, but not Leonie.
We are visiting and we wanted to find her.
What a disappointment. Then the next day, a Sunday, We found Susanna at church.
My husband.
Yes. Would you identify me?
After an emotional reunion, we joined her inside where her son was the guest priest. After church, we found Susanna's husband, Patrick, and met many of her friends. We reminisced about our days together at Providence Teacher Training College and the joy of attending Susanna and Patrick's marriage some 36 years earlier. Susanna insisted that we come to her home for lunch so we could meet her other children and spend more time together after all these years.
This is how we remember one another. This is when we knew.
We are in Susanna's home eating dinner. We surprised her during church this morning, and she brought us back to her house, and she's prepared a sumptuous lunch. And sema and many sauces and chicken and beef and all kinds of good things. And we're having a wonderful time getting reacquainted. Right, Susanna?
Hello.
Right?
Hello.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Then went to bed, couldn't get up in the morning. During lunch, Susanna reminded us of the songs we'd taught the students, and we began singing as if it were yesterday. It made me wonder if this was my Peace Corps legacy. And after lunch, Susanna gave Linda and me each an insalu and suggested that she and Patrick help us find Leonie and Cecilia. So once again, we headed back toward our old school, hopeful that this time we would be successful in finding our old friends.
36 years.
And you're just getting prettier.
Upon our arrival at Leonie's home, we were greeted by her sister Felicia, but unfortunately Leonie still wasn't home. Thankfully, she arrived a little later and we had a good reunion and took lots of pictures. We then went in search of Cecilia, whom we found without difficulty. Cecilia had just finished building a new house, and she proudly showed us the new home she was about to move into. We had tea and once again shared pictures and reminisced about the friendship we had enjoyed 36 years earlier. We were now ready to head back to our base in Lilongwe for mail and supplies before starting our second loop trip in the northern part of the country. We knew that eating opportunities would be more limited along the northern itinerary, and we'd better be prepared for many picnics unless we wanted to dine on roasted rats. So with food supplies secured and a plan that would take us on many back roads to visit current and former Peace Corps sites, we headed north to explore a part of Malawi that was new to us. We made a short visit in Kasungu and also in Mzimba to community centers that had received small Friends of Malawi grants for the purchase of chairs and benches. Both these centers were now being used for AIDS education programs and many other useful community activities.
Prevent yourself from teenage pregnancies, prevent yourself from teenage marriages, other than you are in the situation.
It was heartening to see how these small FOM grants were making a difference. We also traveled to the middle of nowhere to find 2 Peace Corps nurses who were doing AIDS outreach work in surrounding villages. We had good news. We had brought a check for $1,000 from a nonprofit AIDS organization in New York State in response to a grant proposal they had made. The Peace Corps nurses had asked for help in funding bicycle ambulances so that AIDS patients living in villages with no road access could be transported to a clinic for medical care.
the people in the remote villages and the remote sites that have no way to get their sick people here will now have their own bicycle ambulances, their own transport. And we promised these yesterday when we went there. We didn't know how we were going to get them, but we promised them. And here these angels came. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's great. Well, we thank you for your hospitality. It has been so much fun.
It was a pleasure.
Kicking back with you guys last night and just hearing what it's like being in the Peace Corps today. Yeah, 35 years separates our experience, but it's...
We're the older version now, but we're going
We were
strong,
so
girl.
impressed with the work of these dedicated volunteers. As it turned out, some of our most memorable moments during this northern leg of our trip were the driving challenges. One short 40-kilometer section of the trip took us 5 hours to complete, and the only living thing we saw during that entire time were the horseflies that drove us crazy. There were also the problems of washed-out bridges and broken-down trucks. An angel rode with us, though, because despite the road conditions, we didn't so much as have a flat tire. I'd had one regret when I left Malawi in 1964. I'd never explored Lake Malawi from the vantage point of the old steamship Ilala. So I was delighted to discover that after all these years, the Ilala was still making weekly round trips up and down the lake. While Linda waited behind to be joined by her friend Florence, Dave and I took a charming 2-day side trip on the Ilala along the northern coast of Lake Malawi. The villages along the shore were charming, but quite isolated. The Ilala therefore played an important role in bringing supplies and news of the outside world. When we arrived back at our starting point in Nkata Bay, Linda and Florence were there to meet us, and the four of us enjoyed a couple of lazy days on the beach before going in search of Lucy's home. Our telephone message notifying Lucy of our arrival date didn't get delivered, so this time we surprised her. No problem though. We were received warmly and introduced to her family. Currently living with her were a grown daughter and grandson and 2 nephews whose parents had died of AIDS. Her cute grandson Monty proudly gave us a tour of the house, and Lucy made pastries for our afternoon tea. Pictures once again help us close the gap of 36 years. We spent the night with one of Lucy's daughters, and the next day we visited Lucy's private primary school. Fed up with the government-run school system, Lucy retired early, and she and husband Tom built their own school. Literally. Tom made the bricks himself and built the school, and Lucy is the headmistress. It was the best equipped school we saw during our stay in Malawi. We were very impressed with the dedication of Tom and Lucy. They were working tirelessly to make good education available to young Malawians. We presented Lucy with school supplies we had brought with us.
Gifts. Lots and lots of gifts. The whole map of the world. Secondary schools don't have such maps. We are very lucky. Hold on.
And the children thanked us.
Say thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Lucy told us that if it hadn't been for her Peace Corps teachers, she wouldn't be who she is today. She said we had had a strong influence on her life. Hearing that, of course, brought us great joy. It was a happy note on which to end our visit in Malawi. The day before we left Malawi, I had a benchmark birthday, my 60th. and I decided I wanted to do something that would make it especially memorable. So I made an appointment at a Malawian beauty parlor to have extensions woven into my hair. For 9 hours I sat on the cement floor while 5 ladies wove in the white synthetic hair. The pulling on my scalp was torturous, but the social life that revolved around this beauty parlor was a joy to observe and be a part of. My 4 weeks back in Malawi had proved to be an emotional roller coaster ride. There had been the joy of finding and getting reacquainted with former students, and the delight of spending time on beautiful Lake Malawi. There had also been the enormous satisfaction of observing firsthand the dedication of both current and former Peace Corps volunteers. But it had been hard to face the fact that many Malawians still endure a 3-month hunger season, and that AIDS is virtually wiping out a whole generation of citizens. It was also discouraging to find that crime and corruption were so prevalent, and that the education system of which I had been a part some 30 years earlier was now in disarray. So I was glad to have this day in the beauty parlor, enjoying the company of the resilient and kind people of Malawi, the people who have earned it the title of the warm heart of Africa.
Ayisimanga salomhlaba wena ungabheki nokomhlaba wena uzodinga uphinde futhi usisole ayisimanga salomhlaba wena ungabheki nokomhlaba wena uzodinga uphinde futhi usisole ayisimanga salomhlaba lomhlaba bheki nokomhlaba ayo umhlaba ma uzodinga uphinde futhi usisole.
I think this is still working. Quite an adventure, huh? Yeah, it was a very memorable trip. Now, you probably remember the rats. Stand up, Lou. Come here. Come here. You two. There are 2 things that in that movie that were done especially for these 2. One was the additional footage on the rats.
Yeah, we were waiting to watch him eat it. Head and all.
And the other was the dreadlocks. I wanted so bad. Laura was working in New York City at that time, and I wanted so badly to get off the plane and see Laura say, "Oh, Mom!" But those dreadlocks gave me such a headache when we had something like 20 hours to get to New York in terms of the number of stops and so forth, that I don't think they were in more than 24 hours. Just to make it home, but I was in pain. I just had this fierce headache. But I really wanted to get off the airplane and see her reaction. I knew it would be a big one anyway. So part of that is family geared. Anyway, I'm welcome to answer questions.
Wow, how did you get it out of your hair?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, yes. How did you get it under your hair? Out of my hair. It took a long time with both my husband and my Peace Corps housemate working on it. Yeah, because there were a lot of I had very heavy hair in those days. So anyway, it was very heavy. Yeah.
Barbara, one of the most wonderful things about your movie was it's Mary Dora over here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
One of the best things about this was how beautifully you articulated. We could hear every word and understand, and it was really lovely.
Oh, good. Thanks, Mary. Well, needless to say, there are parts of it where, because we just had the one camera, this is a hobbyist project, not a professional one. If it were done professionally, there would have been, microphones and so on and so forth when we were interviewing. I'm thinking of at the beginning of the movie when we were interviewing some of the people. Anyway, but we did the best we could with what we had. Yeah, okay. I wanted to tell you something. I have some notes up here. First, I wanted to tell you about Lake Malawi. Lake Malawi is the 4th largest lake in the world. It's 350 miles long and about 50 miles wide, and it's very, very deep. It's, when I say that the 4th largest, that's in terms of volume, so that includes the diameter and the depth. It's 9th in terms of just area. So, but it's still one of the largest lakes in the world. Also, I wanted to tell you that Malawi, to this day, is one of the poorest countries. It is the 4th poorest country out of the 195 countries that we have in this world. And that puts it down in the 2%, the lowest 2%. And poverty is one of the highest of any place. The population of Malawi is about 21 million, so it's not a big country in terms of population, but it's a country that just simply can't get a break. In 2022, it had a huge cholera outbreak that was worse than COVID, killed 1,500 people. Then in 2023, 2 major cyclones hit the country, and another 1,200 people were killed in that. And right now, this year, it's having a major drought. 23 of the 28 districts have been affected by the drought, and it's lost half of its corn crop and 80% of its rice crop. And that's just in 2024. It has a huge debt because over the years, just in terms of survival, it's borrowed money from the World Bank, etc., the UN. So 35% of its revenues go to pay off debt. And it just can't seem to get ahead. For this presentation, I did some looking on the internet about Malawi today. And I discovered a presentation that was made by the president of Malawi. He's been president now for 4 years. I was quite impressed. This was a presentation he made at the United Nations. And I was very impressed with him. He has a PhD. So he's quite well educated, but he was very articulate in terms of what he was saying to the UN, and he was begging, really begging, that the very poor countries be forgiven their debt. I doubt that will happen, and he was also requesting that Africa be one of the on the Security Council with a vote. But they've never been represented, and the poor countries, I don't think, are represented. So, but anyway, I was quite impressed with him. But there's a lot to overcome. You don't get rid of corruption and poverty overnight. But I'm a little bit hopeful at this point in time. Any other questions?
Why are you hopeful at this point in time? It sounds miserable.
Only because when I watched him, I thought maybe. But it's an area that gets all kinds of weather conditions, so it really isn't hopeful, but I'm a little more hopeful than I was before.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the public
Would you
health?
speak into the microphone, please?
Sure.
Sorry. Would you tell us a little bit more about their public health programs? AIDS, cholera, some of the parasites around Lake Malawi sounds pretty awful. Is there a budget? Are there government programs that are addressing these things?
I'll have to admit that I can't answer that question. I really don't know. I did do a little research, but it wasn't in the field of public health to start with. So a volunteer that had been in public health probably would have a lot better answer than I can come up with. Sorry about that.
There's a question over here, Barbara.
Oh, it's not a question, it's just, I want to go back to the documentary. When Barbara and I were in Malawi, we had desks, we had windows on our room, and we faced Mount Malawi. When we went back in year 2000, no desks, no windows. I mean, it was just awful. We just cried. You hear Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC with desks for Malawi. I still don't know how he comes to Malawi, but I think it's at that time, since the 1960s, things had just gone downhill completely. And still, there was a war in Mozambique where they came over to Malawi and they cut down all the trees and everything else. Malawi cedar used to be, everybody wanted Malawi cedar. And they cut down the trees on the mountain. So things with that. The other thing I wanted to say is Malawi Children's Village that we did visit. A lot of us are still donating every year to help the kids in Malawi. So I just wanted to point those couple of things out because I was on the trip. I hope you didn't notice me.
Neither one of us wanted to be noticed because we were both pretty heavy in those days. Thank you. Yeah.
Barbara, picking up on Harriet here, over here, Ken.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, your neighbor.
Yeah.
This brought tears to my eyes when I saw how the people responded to your return and the memories that you shared. I thought it was wonderful. Is there a fund that can go to supporting the children's villages?
Well, Malawi Children's Village itself, I think, I contribute every year. And then Friends of Malawi is another possibility. It gives money for various grants that Peace Corps are involved in. So they'll help, whatever the project is, they can make a request to the Friends of Malawi.
So they supplement those?
Yeah.
Okay, but the Malawi Children's Villages has its own fundraising or
Yes, and it's very well run.
Is that online?
It is, I'm sure it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay. And if you can't find it online, I have the information.
Okay.
Apparently.
Barbara, I noticed many women and children, but I did not see many men or young men. Have they migrated?
Well, many of the men in Malawi historically, at least when we were there as Peace Corps volunteers, were going down to South Africa to work in the mines.
That's what I wondered.
And I would assume that's probably still true, but I don't really have facts on that. So yes, but then the other part of it was that we were working with girls at a girls' school, and so our contacts were more women, yeah. Any other questions?
I'd like to know who ate the rats. Did you sample, Barbara?
I did not.
Did any of your group sample?
They did not. That was done for these two. The extra footage was done for these two.
One other thing. You saw Linda. Hello. Oh, okay. You saw Linda, who lived with Barbara for the 2 years, and then she stayed on a year. So she was my roommate also. So that's how I know. And we have a Peace Corps volunteer, return volunteer, who's in Vista Del Monte, who worked with Linda in the Peace Corps in Washington. And Linda introduced her to us, so she meets with us when we meet.
And could I comment that I have a friend who lives in San Luis Obispo who also was a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi, and she's coming down on the 17th to meet with these folks and the rest of the Peace Corps people here.
Any other questions?
Could we ask about your outfit?
Oh, this was a gift to me. It is a Malawi dress. It was gifted to me, I don't know, 20 or some years ago, around the time, but after I came back, actually. There was a family that I'd gotten to know, and they had 5 kids, and 3 of them were living here in the United States. And one of them at that time was studying here in Santa Barbara, so I got to know them a little bit. Anyway, but it's just a typical, it does also have and I noticed at the end of the film, Lucy had a matching thing around her hair. I have that goes with this dress, but I don't know how to put it on my hair. And so, anyway, I don't know why I brought this dress with me to Valle Verde. I mean, I never thought I'd wear it again, but I guess I just couldn't let it go. So thank you for giving me an excuse to wear it. Okay, thank you.